She pulled a boy from a burning car and vanished. 15 years later, he saw a homeless woman with a scar and was astonished. Benjamin Harris was 10 years old and living a life most people could only dream of. From the 40th floor penthouse of a Manhattan skyscraper, he could see the entire city spread out below him like a playground. His parents, Mary and Paul Harris, were influential entrepreneurs, their names often splashed across business magazines. They had built an empire from scratch, and with that came wealth, power, and the ability to give their son anything he wanted. Benjamin's days were meticulously curated. Each morning began with private lessons in languages, music, or mathematics, delivered by the city's most sought-after tutors. Afternoons were reserved for sports and activities designed to hone his skills and discipline. On weekends, he attended high society events with his parents, where people commented on how poised and intelligent he was for his age. Despite this structured life, Benjamin wasn't unhappy. He loved his parents and admired their success, even if their time with him was often limited. Instead, he found comfort in the quiet moments he shared with Brian Miller, the family's longtime chauffeur. Brian, with his warm smile and endless patience, had been a constant presence in Benjamin's life. The two shared a bond that felt almost familial, with Brian often acting as a surrogate uncle in the boy's life. One bright summer afternoon, Benjamin was in the sprawling garden of his family's estate. The lush green lawn stretched endlessly, bordered by vibrant flowers and tall hedges. He was playing catch with his best friend, the sound of their laughter carried by the breeze. From the mansion's terrace, Mary and Paul looked on approvingly. Their conversations about upcoming business deals momentarily paused to watch their son enjoy his carefree moment. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, small cracks began to form. Paul's company was facing increasing pressure from competitors, and Mary was embroiled in a tense legal battle over a new project. The couple's work consumed them, leaving little room for family time. Though Benjamin rarely complained, he noticed their growing absence and often turned to Brian for reassurance. That evening, Benjamin was scheduled to return to the city with Brian, as he had an early recital the next morning. The chauffeur had spent the entire day running errands for the family, his exhaustion evident in the slow way he carried himself. When Mary suggested rescheduling the trip, Brian brushed off her concerns. "I'll be fine, Mrs. Harris," he said with a reassuring smile. "It's not a long drive." Benjamin climbed into the back seat of the sleek black sedan, excitedly clutching his violin case. As the car pulled out of the estate's long driveway, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Inside the car, Benjamin chatted animatedly, his enthusiasm cutting through Brian's growing fatigue. The city lights began to appear in the distance, glittering against the darkening sky. It was a scene Benjamin loved, one that made him feel both small and invincible at the same time. He leaned against the window, lost in thought as the car glided down the highway. For now, everything seemed as it always had been, orderly, predictable, and safe. But neither Benjamin nor Brian could have foreseen the chain of events about to unfold, one that would shatter their lives and reveal the fragility of the world they had taken for granted. The Harris family's reputation as the perfect household had always been carefully maintained. Mary and Paul Harris were hailed as visionaries in their respective industries, embodying the ideal of success. Yet, their relentless pursuit of professional achievements came at a cost. Benjamin, though surrounded by wealth and opportunity, often felt the quiet absence of his parents' presence. Their affection was genuine but overshadowed by the demands of their careers. His days were filled with tutors and extracurricular activities, but the warmth of family dinners or shared laughter had become a rare commodity. Brian Miller, the family's steadfast chauffeur, became Benjamin's source of stability. With his affable demeanor and gentle wisdom, Brian filled the gaps left by Mary and Paul. He shared stories from his own youth, gave Benjamin pep talks before performances, and even offered a listening ear for the boy's fears and frustrations. For Benjamin, Brian was more than a driver, he was a confidant. The summer evening when the accident began to take shape seemed like any other. The Harris estate was quiet, the only sounds coming from Benjamin's laughter as he played in the garden. But within the grand mansion, tension brewed. Mary paced the living room, clutching her phone as she argued with a business associate. Paul sat in his study, surrounded by piles of paperwork, his brow furrowed in concentration. Neither noticed as Brian pulled the sleek black sedan into the driveway, preparing to take Benjamin back to the city. "Don't be late for your recital, Benny," Mary called out briefly as the boy hugged her goodbye. "I won't, Mom," he replied, climbing into the car. The ride started uneventfully. Benjamin, energized from the day's activities, talked excitedly about his upcoming performance. Brian, as always, listened attentively, chuckling at the boy's enthusiasm. The familiarity of their exchanges masked the growing weariness in Brian's eyes, the subtle heaviness in his voice. As they drove, the city's skyline grew larger, its glittering lights promising the comfort of home. Benjamin's excitement eventually gave way to drowsiness. He leaned back in his seat, clutching his violin case as his eyelids grew heavy. Brian's hands gripped the wheel tightly, his focus wavering. He had worked longer hours than usual, shuttling Mary and Paul between meetings and events before embarking on the evening drive. The rhythmic hum of the engine and the dim glow of the dashboard lights blurred the line between wakefulness and exhaustion. A sudden honk from an oncoming vehicle jolted Brian awake. His heart raced as he adjusted the car back into its lane, glancing nervously in the rearview mirror at Benjamin, who remained asleep. "Get it together, Brian," he muttered to himself, shaking his head in an attempt to stay alert. The road stretched ahead, dark and quiet, lined with dense trees on either side. The car's headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the asphalt as Brian forced himself to focus. But his fatigue was insidious, a weight he couldn't shake. Benjamin stirred slightly in the back seat, murmuring in his sleep. Brian glanced at him briefly, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. And then, in the span of a heartbeat, it happened. The headlights caught the glint of something on the road, a deer frozen in place. Brian instinctively swerved to avoid it, the car's tires screeching against the pavement. The vehicle veered off the road, careening toward the trees. In the chaos, Benjamin awoke with a gasp, his world spinning as the car collided with a massive oak tree. The impact was deafening, the metal crumpling like paper. Smoke began to seep into the cabin, and the faint smell of gasoline filled the air. Benjamin, disoriented and terrified, struggled against his seatbelt, but it wouldn't budge. In the driver's seat, Brian slumped forward, unresponsive. The only sound now was the crackling of flames as they began to lick at the edges of the car. Benjamin screamed for help, his voice barely audible over the growing inferno. Unbeknownst to him, someone was watching from the shadows, drawn by the sound of the crash. The sharp crackling of fire filled the air as smoke thickened inside the crumpled car. Benjamin coughed violently, his small hands tugging frantically at the seatbelt locked tight across his chest. His cries for help echoed into the night, muffled by the chaos of the growing flames. Outside, a woman crouched in the shadows near the tree lean. Her clothes were worn and patched, and her hair hung in messy strands around her face. She had been seeking shelter under a nearby bridge when the sound of screeching tires and the deafening crash had drawn her attention. What she saw now was a scene of horror, a car wrapped around a tree, fire spreading rapidly, and the faint cries of a child trapped inside. She hesitated for only a moment. The woman knew the risk, but something stronger than fear compelled her forward. With quick strides, she approached the burning vehicle, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The heat was suffocating as she reached the driver's side, where Brian sat motionless, his body slumped against the wheel. A sharp pang of despair gripped her, but she had no time to linger. She turned her attention to the back seat, where Benjamin's wide, tear-filled eyes locked onto hers. "Help," he choked out, his voice barely audible through the smoke. "I've got you," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the haze like a lifeline. She searched frantically for a way to reach him. The door was jammed, warped by the impact, and the windows were splintered but still intact. Spotting a long piece of metal debris near the crash site, she grabbed it without hesitation, ignoring the sharp edges that sliced into her palms. With a grunt of effort, she drove the metal through the shattered window, widening the opening enough to reach inside. Shards of glass bit into her arms as she extended them toward Benjamin. "Can you move?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. Benjamin shook his head, his small hands still clutching the unyielding seatbelt. The woman's heart sank, but she forced herself to focus. She leaned in farther, coughing as the smoke stung her throat. Her fingers found the release mechanism of the belt, and with a sharp click, it came loose. "Hold on to me," she urged, gripping his arms and pulling him toward her. The fire roared louder, licking at the back seat as she dragged Benjamin out of the wreckage. Her muscles burned with the effort, but she didn't stop until they were both a safe distance away from the flames. The moment she set him down, the car erupted in a fiery explosion. The force knocked her backward, and she landed hard on the ground, her ears ringing. Benjamin stared at the inferno, his small chest heaving as he struggled to process what had just happened. His gaze shifted to the woman, who was sitting up slowly, her arms covered in bloodied scratches and her face marred by fresh burns. You saved me," he whispered, his voice trembling. The woman met his eyes, her expression a mix of exhaustion and relief. "You're safe now," she said softly, her voice cracking. Before Benjamin could respond, distant sirens pierced the night, growing louder with each passing second. The woman's face changed, her relief replaced by urgency. "I can't stay," she muttered, scrambling to her feet. "Wait." Benjamin called after her, his small hand reaching out. "Who are you?" She paused, glancing back at him for just a moment. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice was firm. "Just someone passing through." With that, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving Benjamin alone as emergency responders arrived. They swarmed the scene, but no one could find any trace of the woman who had risked her life to save the boy. To Benjamin, she became an enduring mystery, a guardian angel who vanished as quickly as she appeared. The next morning, Benjamin woke up in a hospital bed, his small body aching and his throat raw from inhaling smoke. Bright sunlight streamed through the window, but the warmth it offered did little to calm the whirlwind of emotions inside him. He glanced around the room, his heart sinking when he saw his mother sitting stiffly in a chair by the window, her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was sharp and urgent as she spoke, likely to a lawyer or insurance agent, discussing the details of the accident. When she noticed Benjamin was awake, her expression softened, and she quickly ended the call. "Benny, sweetheart," she said, crossing the room to kneel by his bedside. She smoothed his hair back gently. "How are you feeling?" He hesitated, unsure of how to answer. His memories of the crash were a jumbled mess. Brian slumped over the wheel, the fire consuming the car, and the woman who had pulled him to safety. The thought of Brian made his chest tighten. "Brian, is he okay?" Benjamin's voice cracked as he asked the question he already feared the answer to. Mary's face fell. She took a shaky breath before replying, "Brian didn't make it, honey. I'm so sorry." The words hit him like a blow. Tears filled his eyes as he tried to process the loss of the man who had been a constant in his life. The grief felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, and for a long moment he couldn't speak. "I saw someone," he finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "A lady. She saved me." Mary blinked, caught off guard. "A lady? What do you mean?" Benjamin described the mysterious woman as best as he could, the way she had broken the window, pulled him out, and disappeared into the night. His mother listened intently, her expression shifting between disbelief and concern. "The paramedics didn't mention anyone," she said after a pause. Maybe you imagined it, Benny." "You were in shock." "No," he protested, his voice stronger now. "She was real. She saved me, Mom. She had scars, and she left before anyone could see her." Mary frowned, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she hugged him tightly, whispering soothing words. But even as she comforted him, Benjamin could see the doubt in her eyes. In the days that followed, the accident became the center of media attention. News outlets reported on the fiery crash that claimed the life of Brian Miller, the loyal chauffeur of the Harris family. The story of Benjamin's miraculous survival was highlighted, but there was no mention of a mysterious woman. Benjamin, however, couldn't stop thinking about her. The memory of her scarred face and determined eyes lingered in his mind. He didn't know her name or why she had been there that night, but he felt a deep sense of gratitude and curiosity. Who was she, and why had she disappeared? As the weeks turned into months, Benjamin struggled to return to normalcy. The accident had left him with more than just physical scars. It had shaken the foundation of his once perfect world. Brian's absence was deeply felt, and the strained relationship with his parents only grew more apparent as they buried themselves in their work to cope with the fallout. For Benjamin, the memory of the woman became a source of both solace and frustration. He wanted to find her, to thank her, to understand why she had risked her life for his. But despite his efforts to ask around or search the area where the crash had occurred, there were no clues. She had vanished, leaving only questions behind. Little did Benjamin know, the answers he sought would take years to unfold, setting the stage for a reunion he could never have imagined. 15 years passed, but the memory of that fateful night never left Benjamin Harris. Now 25 years old, he had channeled the pain and confusion of his childhood into something extraordinary. The boy who had once lived a life of privilege and luxury had grown into a man driven by purpose. In the aftermath of the accident, Benjamin had struggled to find meaning in the tragedy. Losing Brian had been a devastating blow, and the unanswered questions surrounding the woman who saved him haunted him well into his teenage years. His parents, though supportive in their way, continued to bury themselves in their work, leaving Benjamin to navigate his grief largely on his own. But out of that darkness, a spark of inspiration emerged. Benjamin realized he couldn't change the past, but he could honor the sacrifices made for him. At the age of 21, he founded Hope Haven, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping the homeless and disadvantaged. Hope Haven quickly grew into a beacon of hope for the city's underserved communities. The organization provided hot meals, temporary housing, job training, and medical care to those in need. For Benjamin, it was more than a charity. It was a way to repay the debt he felt to the mysterious woman who had saved his life. Despite his success, Benjamin remained humble and hands-on, often spending his days at the shelters, listening to the stories of the people he served. He had an innate ability to connect with them, driven by the belief that everyone deserved a second chance. One brisk autumn afternoon, Benjamin arrived at Hope Haven's largest shelter to oversee a food drive. The hall buzzed with activity as volunteers handed out warm meals and supplies. Benjamin moved through the crowd, greeting people with a warm smile and words of encouragement. As he helped distribute coats, his eyes landed on a woman sitting quietly in the corner. She was older, her face weathered by years of hardship. Her hair was streaked with gray, and her clothes hung loosely on her thin frame. But it wasn't her frailty that caught his attention. It was the scar running down the side of her face, jagged and unmistakable. Benjamin froze, his heart pounding as a flood of memories washed over him. Could it be her? He approached cautiously, unsure of what to say. The woman looked up as he neared, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of weariness and curiosity. "Hello," Benjamin said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. "I'm Benjamin. Welcome to Hope Haven." The woman nodded slightly, but didn't respond. She seemed guarded, as though she were used to keeping her distance. "I couldn't help but notice your scar," he continued gently. I think we might have met before." Her eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment he thought she might brush him off. But then she spoke, her voice low and hoarse. "I doubt that," she said, her tone clipped. "I don't exactly run in the same circles as people like you." Benjamin didn't falter. 15 years ago," he said quietly, "there was an accident. A car caught fire, and a woman saved me. She disappeared before anyone could thank her. I think that woman might have been you." The room around them seemed to fade as Benjamin watched her reaction. Her expression shifted, a flicker of recognition crossing her face before she quickly masked it. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, turning her gaze away. But her trembling hands betrayed her calm facade. Benjamin knelt slightly to meet her eye level. "If it was you, I want to thank you," he said earnestly. "You didn't just save my life, you changed it. Everything I've done since then, everything I've built with Hope Haven, is because of you." The woman remained silent for a long moment. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping as though a great weight had settled on them. "Simone," she said quietly. "My name is Simone Johnson." The confirmation sent a jolt through Benjamin. After years of wondering, searching, and hoping, he had finally found her. Benjamin sat across from Simone in one of Hope Haven's quieter rooms. The hum of activity from the main hall faded into the background as he waited for her to speak. She looked uneasy, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she avoided his gaze. "I don't know why you care so much," she muttered finally, her voice tinged with frustration. "It was a long time ago." "Because you saved me," Benjamin replied gently. "I owe my life to you, Simone. And I've spent 15 years wondering who you were and why you disappeared that night." Simone sighed heavily, her shoulders slumping. She seemed to weigh her options, deciding whether to trust him. Finally, she began to speak. "I wasn't always like this," she said, gesturing vaguely at her worn clothes and weathered face. "I had a job, a family, a life, but it all fell apart." She paused, the memories clearly painful. Benjamin listened attentively, his heart aching for the woman who had once been his savior. "I used to work as a waitress in a diner downtown," she continued. "It didn't pay much, but it was honest work. I had a daughter, Lily. She was everything to me." A faint smile flickered across her face at the mention of her daughter, but it quickly faded. One day, Lily got sick, real sick. I couldn't afford the hospital bills. I tried everything to keep us afloat, but it wasn't enough. I lost the apartment, and with it, everything we had. Lily ended up in the foster system because I couldn't take care of her anymore. It broke me. Simone's voice cracked, and she wiped at her eyes, though no tears came. After that, I just drifted. I didn't care what happened to me. I was on the streets, scavenging to survive. That's where I was the night of your accident. Benjamin's chest tightened as he imagined the hardships she must have endured. And yet, you risked your life to save mine, he said softly. Simone shrugged. I heard the crash and saw the flames. I didn't think, I just acted. I wasn't going to let a kid die if I could help it. But when the sirens started coming, I panicked. I had a record for shoplifting and trespassing, stupid things I did just to survive. I didn't want to get caught, so I ran. She looked down at her hands, her voice quiet. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. Didn't expect you to even remember me. Benjamin reached out, his hand resting lightly on hers. Not a day goes by that I don't think about what you did. You gave me a second chance, Simone. And now I want to do the same for you. Her eyes widened slightly, and she shook her head. I don't need your pity. It's not pity, Benjamin said firmly. It's gratitude. You deserve better than this, and I want to help. Simone hesitated, her defenses still up. But something in Benjamin's earnestness seemed to reach her. What are you offering? She asked cautiously. A fresh start, he replied. A place to stay, a job here at Hope Haven, and the support you need to rebuild your life. Simone stared at him, disbelief and hope warring in her expression. For years, she had told herself that she didn't need anyone, that she had made her bed and had to lie in it. But now, someone was offering her a chance to rise again, to be something more than the scars of her past. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. All right, I'll try. Benjamin smiled, relief washing over him. That's all I ask. Simone Johnson moved into a small room above Hope Haven's main shelter. It wasn't much, a simple bed, a worn dresser, and a window overlooking the busy street below. But it was the first real roof over her head in years. For Simone, it felt like the first step toward reclaiming the life she had lost. Benjamin personally ensured she was welcomed by the staff and volunteers. Many of them knew him as a leader with an open heart, so it wasn't surprising to see him go to such lengths to help someone. Yet, Simone could sense the quiet curiosity in their gazes. Who was this woman with the scarred face and hardened demeanor, and what had brought her to Benjamin's attention? At first, Simone struggled to adjust. She had grown accustomed to keeping to herself, her guard always up. But at Hope Haven, she found herself surrounded by kindness, a strange and unfamiliar sensation. Her first task was helping in a kitchen, serving meals to the shelter's guests. It was exhausting work, but as she watched the gratitude on their faces, Simone began to feel something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. One evening, as she wiped down the counters after the dinner rush, Benjamin approached her. How's it going? He asked, leaning casually against the doorframe. Simone shrugged, her lips quirking into a half-smile. Not bad. No one's thrown a plate at me yet, so I must be doing something right. Benjamin chuckled. That's a good start. But I was thinking, you have a way with people. I've seen the way you talk to the guests. It's like you understand them. I do understand them, she said simply. I've been where they are. That's why I think you'd be great working directly with them, he said. We need someone to help with outreach, finding people on the streets, letting them know we're here, and helping them transition when they come in. It's not an easy job, but I think you'd be perfect for it. Simone hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. Outreach, she repeated. You really think I could do that? I don't just think. You already are, Benjamin said with a smile. You've lived it, Simone. That gives you a connection with people that no amount of training can teach. You can make them feel seen in a way few others can. Simone felt a swell of emotion she couldn't quite name. It had been so long since anyone believed she was capable of something meaningful. I'll give it a shot, she said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. Over the following weeks, Simone threw herself into her new role. She joined Benjamin and the outreach team on late-night trips to parks, alleyways, and abandoned buildings, speaking to those who had slipped through society's cracks. She listened to their stories, offering not just resources but empathy, a rare and precious gift. One cold night, as she helped an elderly man into the shelter's van, he looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "I didn't think anyone cared anymore." Simone smiled, the words striking a chord deep within her. "I've been where you are," she said gently, "and I know it doesn't have to stay that way." As Hope Haven continued to thrive, so did Simone. She began to feel a sense of belonging she hadn't known since losing Lily. She shared her story with Benjamin one evening over coffee, describing her daughter's laughter and the ache of their separation. "She'd be proud of you," Benjamin said sincerely. Simone nodded, her eyes glistening. "Maybe someday I'll get to tell her all this myself." For the first time in years, that hope didn't feel so distant. Years passed, and Hope Haven flourished, becoming a cornerstone of the community. Its programs expanded, offering everything from addiction recovery services to educational workshops and job placement. The shelter became more than a place to stay. It became a symbol of second chances. At the heart of it all were Benjamin and Simone. Together, they formed a partnership built on shared pain, resilience, and an unwavering belief in the power of kindness. Simone had become a pillar of the organization. Her outreach work was transformative, bringing in countless individuals who had once felt invisible. She had a way of breaking through barriers, speaking to people in a way that made them feel seen. Her scar, once a mark of pain, had become a badge of courage, a reminder to others that survival was possible. One crisp autumn evening, Hope Haven held its annual gala, a celebration of the organization's achievements and a fundraiser for its future projects. The event was held in a beautifully decorated community center, with donors, volunteers, and beneficiaries mingling under strings of twinkling lights. Simone stood off to the side, watching the crowd with a quiet sense of pride. She wore a simple dress and had tied her hair back, the faint scars on her face softened by the warm glow of the lights. Benjamin approached her, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. He handed one to her with a grin. "Quite the turnout," he said, gesturing to the bustling room. Simone nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's incredible to think how far this place has come. How far we've come." Benjamin raised his glass. "To second chances," he said. Simone clinked her glass against his. "To hope." As the night went on, guests shared their stories of lives rebuilt, families reunited, and futures reclaimed. One woman tearfully recounted how Simone had found her on a freezing winter night, bringing her to Hope Haven and helping her get clean. Another man spoke about how the organization had helped him reconnect with his estranged children. Listening to these testimonials, Simone felt a warmth that had been absent from her life for so long. She glanced at Benjamin, who was smiling at her from across the room, and gave him a nod of gratitude. Later that night, as the guests began to leave, Simone and Benjamin walked outside to the quiet street. The air was crisp, and the stars were scattered across the sky. "You've changed so many lives, Simone," Benjamin said, his voice filled with admiration. "So have you," she replied. "But I couldn't have done this without you." Benjamin shook his head. "You're the one who gave me the chance to live, Simone. Everything I've done, it's all because of you." For a moment, they stood in silence, both reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. Simone looked up at the stars, a wistful expression on her face. "I used to think my life was over," she said softly, "but now I feel like it's just beginning." Benjamin smiled. "That's the beauty of hope. It's never too late to start again." As they stood there, 2 people bound by an act of bravery and a shared mission, the world seemed a little brighter. Hope Haven had become more than an organization. It was a legacy of kindness, resilience, and redemption. And for Benjamin and Simone, it was proof that even in the darkest of times, the light of hope could shine through, transforming lives and building a future worth believing in.